Hello, I'm Ken Ferrante, the Chief of the Hoboken Police Department. I have a message today for New Year's as we step into 2021 just a few hours from now, taking a look back at 2020. This message is for our law enforcement officers in the city of Hoboken, law enforcement officers in our region, as well as our residents, our citizens, as well as our elected officials of Hoboken, our county, and our state. In order to step into 2021 a few hours from now and have this be a much more positive year, from a law enforcement perspective, we need to assess what we have just dealt with over these last 12 and a half months. The grueling 2020 began 2 weeks before we even stepped into the year. On December 10th, we had the assassination of Detective Joseph Seals in the awful terrorist attack in Jersey City, which was brought on by hate for both the law enforcement and the Jewish communities. It is something that our officers, we had several dozen respond to that event, and fortunately many lives were saved that day, but all started with the terrible killings and assassinations of innocent victims. That began a year which was very trying and very unique for law enforcement. As we hit March 6th in the city of Hoboken, we had our first meeting on that Friday that we had a pandemic that is attacking this country. New Jersey had just had its first positive case, and Hoboken, we were starting to get ready for our battle of how we're going to prevent widespread illness and death and do the best thing we can against something that no one knew about on March 6th. On March 9th, I met with my command staff and we began basically reinventing policing, trying to keep our officers as safe as possible. The outstanding work our officers did, I cannot thank them enough. I cannot thank you enough. We did everything possible to keep our illnesses down, our deaths down in Hoboken, keep people safe. Our numbers were outstanding compared to other surrounding areas. But even with outstanding numbers compared to others, it was marked with severe illnesses and deaths of some of our officers' family members, people we knew, something that we were not ready for, and we were learning on the fly. But our officers, for 3 steady months of that first wave, were here every day, responding to 300 to 400 calls per day, and they were here to protect our community. Again, I can never thank them enough. So as we began to slow down the first wave, what our profession nationwide felt on May 25th was seeing an awful murder that was committed by a police officer in Minneapolis, the murder of George Floyd. What this brought afterwards was extremely trying for law enforcement officers. Protests nationwide, one right here which was the largest protest in the state of New Jersey. 10,000 people speaking out against inequality, racism, and that murder. In that, law enforcement officers were broad-brushed blamed as being racist, as being killers. And every officer had to do the best they could, keep their head, keep their professionalism, and keep those protests safe. Keep those protesters safe, and also acknowledge that there are issues in our country that need to improve. But in that, by some people that were extreme on both ends of the spectrum, there was a lot of demonizing of police officers. And I am still in shock of how our officers dealt with the many trying cases that they did over the summer after these protests. Again, 10,000 people in the city of Hoboken protesting the same week that police precincts were being burned around the country. We had a peaceful protest with only 1 arrest, no one injured in the city of Hoboken, nothing set on fire, and it showed when people work together, from law enforcement to elected officials to residents, things can be peaceful. I have no qualms in saying in my 28-year career, that was one of about 3 days that I was scared. Having that many people, having 750 officers on our grounds. One person, whether from that 10,000 or from the 750 in the law enforcement doing something wrong, could have made much different of a day and much different of a ending of a career for me. And for those that are in this law enforcement profession for a long time, we wanted this to be a positive day moving forward, and I think we accomplished that. So there were protests around the state, around the country. Our officers were involved in many, keeping them safe, and New Jersey was at the forefront. Aside from a couple incidents in this state, almost all of our protests remained peaceful, which really tells us what New Jersey and what Hudson County is about. So as we get past a couple protests and a lot of positive work began about ensuring equality moving forward, what we saw in Hoboken and in the tri-state area was a fireworks phenomenon. And I state these things because I want our officers, when we're in law enforcement, we get into a zone sometimes when we're dealing with bad times. During bad times is when the best of policing comes out. I always used to say that at awards day or promotion days. Again, the worst times brings the best in policing. So we were hit with 10 to 12 unique situations that is the reason why I want to bring this out today. We need to be aware of where we came from in order to have that positive step into 2021. With the fireworks phenomenon, we had groups of people coming into residential areas between 1 and 4 a.m. in the mornings, shooting industrial strength fireworks all over the place, which it sounded like a war zone. This was done in many communities, again, in the tri-state area, and even started going up to New England. And there were many theories about why was this? Was it in favor of the protests? Was it young individuals acting out because they were cooped up? Was it first responders, a response to the protesters? I remember when I was interviewed by media, I said, I don't care what the reason is or what the theory, we're going to stop the conduct. And the conduct was waking up people all over communities in absolute fear, wondering what is going on in my city. So our officers, again, stepped up. A lot of people that were coming to do these firework displays at 3 o'clock in the morning brought video cameras with them. They were videoing our officers trying to create conflict and try to catch our officers in a situation that could go viral. Our officers dealt with many summonses, many arrests. We arrested some people for arson that actually fired high-strength fireworks in through windows of residences in the middle of the night. Exemplary work from our officers that, one, we did not have any complaints against them. Two, nothing went viral. We did not have any officers mistreating these people that were coming for whatever reason to create this havoc. And arrests and summonses were made, and that conduct was stopped. All through my career as a supervisor, over the last 20 years, I always talked about we don't police a group. We don't target a group, whether it's a gang, whether it's a nationality, whether it's an organization. We police conduct. And that is a key thing that officers need to be aware of and reinstate, and the citizens need to be aware of. When a police officer gets a call for service, they are not asking, what group is this? What race is the victim? What gender is the victim? What is the victim's sexual orientation? An officer gets called to a scene and they go to save lives and protect our community. And people need to be aware of that. And our officers continue to do an exemplary job with that this year. We had 2 cases during the summer where a weapon was pulled off an officer, a gun was pulled off an officer, and another situation where a male had a machete. Both cases, officers have been justified in using the deadly force, which is the highest force allowed. They did not. They controlled those suspects, got them apprehended, and at not one time did those suspects get injured, and citizens didn't get injured. And that is part of the exemplary work that these officers have done throughout this year. As we headed out of the protests and headed after the fireworks phenomenon, we then dealt with the reopening of New Jersey. And this was a very trying time for our officers, where we needed to help small businesses, we needed to help our bar and restaurant industry, but we also needed to keep it safe. So it was a balance, and it was a 50-50 divide. Half of our people wanted our residents wanted the businesses helped, half our residents wanted nobody around because of the fears of still having the pandemic. Again, being balanced, trying to be rational in our decision making, prioritize where we need to do our enforcement. I think we came out of a very confusing time in a positive way, where a lot of our businesses are going to remain as we head out of this pandemic, and they did not close down because we were able to help them. And our numbers in Hoboken stayed very low compared to our surrounding communities and surrounding areas in the tri-state area. It was a confusing time where a police department in the state of New Jersey, we usually get from the state, whether a governor, the attorney general guidelines, directives, we usually get 10 to 20 executive orders or guidelines per year. Our police officers in the state of New Jersey had to deal with, comprehend, learn how to police it, over 200 executive orders. That is information overload. Police executives, command staffs, we were overwhelmed by that, trying to know what is the current law at this moment, what is the right thing, how are we going to address it. We all need to know, and you need to know, over 200 executive orders our officers had to digest and understand. We've also had major changes in the last several months that we go into 2021, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later, what our officers are going to have as another reinventing of policing. During this time, in dealing with that, what did we have? The political extremes in this country going into a presidential election in the first week of November. A extreme divide that we've never seen in our lifetimes, not in my 48 years, that's for certain. And we cannot be political in our decisions. Criminal justice is about balancing the facts and coming up to balancing the scales to see which way is it going, what is right, what is wrong, what is happening, and that is done based on fact, is based on evidence, is not based on political opinion. Many people in our country, not only here in Hoboken, a lot of their decisions and their stances over this year were extreme political divides. I would always say you could put on channel CNN or Fox, and it looked like we were watching two different countries. And we had the same thing here on our level. In the state, in the country, if someone was a conservative, they went to the extreme. If people were liberal, they went to the extreme left. And that is not the way to come to best practices. It is not the way to come. It can't be worked in law enforcement. We have to be rational, reasonable, and fair. And we have to always police with the mindset of equality. Everyone is equal that we go out to protect, and everybody's equal that we go out and unfortunately sometimes have to arrest or summons. So we get past the presidential election. Here on January 1st, we know we have an inauguration in 20 days, but we still see the political divide that the country is dealing with that. And we had our own tragic situation here in Hoboken. On November 20th, we had Sergeant Pete Zannon go into cardiac arrest at his home. And several hours later, as we went to November 21st, he succumbed to that illness, and we had the death of an active officer. In my 7 years as chief, without a doubt, it's the hardest thing to deal with and worst thing to deal with, especially when we have 150 employees, their emotions, the families of Sergeant Peter Zannon, and everything we do moving ahead this year, we have to do with Pete's memory of his charitable ways with the toy drive and other coat drives, because as you hear, I want to discuss later, I have a message to ask for 2021, and I think that in the memory of those that we lost, and those listening today, almost all of you have lost someone this year, whether it was from a tragic death in this situation as Pete Zannon did, or the COVID losses. We've had 35 losses in the city of Hoboken, many more in New Jersey, and as we know, way too many in the hundreds of thousands, 300,000 plus in this country. You know someone, or you have someone close to you that you've lost. And that's what about moving into 2021, remembering that and being positive as we move ahead. As we head into 2021, we've dealt with a brutal second wave where maybe not as deadly, but much more contagious with much larger numbers of people sick. Whatever your stance is as far as what you need to protect yourself, I don't state that to you what you should do. I know what I do. Okay, I do wear a mask as anytime I'm out of my office or my home. I take all proper supplements with zinc and elderberry. You have to have your own comfort level. You know, for people that demonize those that wear masks, demonize those that don't, it's part of this extreme divide that our country is dealing with. But for those that think this is not a true situation and it was a political situation, then shamefully you don't know somebody that's been sick or has died. In the first wave of the pandemic, we only had 3 officers that became ill, which was absolutely amazing. It was shocking. We did everything we could to make a safe environment, but there was also some luck on our side. In the second wave, we've now had 27 employees that became sick and 112 that had to quarantine because of exposures to those officers or exposures to immediate family members that got it. Every day, those officers that are in quarantine, I give them a call. See how they're doing, see how their family's doing. We've dealt with many, more than 10, that were extremely ill. A couple of our employees that were worried about their own lives, a couple that had immediate family members that they live with that went to intensive care units, and the fear of losing those, succumbing to deaths. This is real. And we are in an area where we have a vaccine starting up, still debates about how that should be administered, if it should be used or not, when it should be used, how strong it is. But we are 9 months, 10 months going into next month into this, and we all need to do whatever we can to get out of this. And we need to be aware that there are people that are still very sick, and our numbers are still, they are true numbers. I talk to our officers who are sick. I talk to officers who have family members who are extremely sick. Just had notice yesterday of officers here whose mother went into the hospital a couple days ago and is in critical condition. These are not stories. These are true things that are happening to people. So we all need to do anything we can to help us get out of this. And we got to do this sensibly and confidently that we can do this. But the bottom line is our police officers, our firefighters, our EMTs are still going to be responding to those calls. We are going to have our 300 to 400 calls for service per day that our officers are going to go help. When there are people that want to demonize law enforcement, here's a number that may shock you. In the United States, in the over 25,000 law enforcement agencies we have, there are close to 1 million calls for service per day. 1 million calls for service per day. There are 300 right here plus in the city of Hoboken. So those couple situations of evil in a uniform that we have seen, that law enforcement officers and executives and groups speak out against, that is not a percentage of law enforcement in our country. Almost all of our men and women that wear blue are good people that are trying to protect you and trying to protect our community and trying to keep order. And politicians on all levels, local, county, state, federal, need to realize that before they put out statements that demonize a profession. I call on all our elected officials that see this today to make a commitment for 2021 and do an 8-hour ride-along in a city law enforcement agency with an officer. Do the whole 8-hour tour. Not the 5 minutes and the photo op, not the hour. Go through a tour and watch what our officers deal with all around the country, but especially here, and see the roller coasters of emotions that an officer will deal with in a day. Dealing with a person that's emotionally unstable, dealing with a suicide call, dealing with a DOA, dealing with a burglary, dealing with the cat in the tree, dealing with the dead bird. It's a roller coaster of what an officer needs to deal with and keep a balance. So I call on you, please commit yourself to do an 8-hour tour with one of our officers in New Jersey. And I'm always open to any of our local officials doing it here. I've always invited, and I've had a couple of officials that took me up on it. I want you to see what our officers deal with and experience that whole 8 hours from the time they step out into the street. Officers are going to run in to save lives. That is what's instilled in us. We just saw it in Tennessee. For those that want to demonize policing, here are 6 police officers that did not know anybody that was on that block on Christmas Day. What did we know? There were calls of shots fired. There was a speaker from an RV that said there was explosives that are going to go off in 15 minutes. And 6 officers put their lives aside and said, we need to rescue anybody that's in this area and clear this area. Did you see the debris that was created by that explosion that occurred 15 minutes later? 3 people were injured. 3. And that's because of the courage of law enforcement officers that went and cleared that area. Along with some of the demonizing that was done of law enforcement this year, we are enforcing laws that are created by legislature, whether it's on the federal end, the state end, or even local ends in our communities. Please realize that. We have some law changes that are happening now. We are an agency. We're a quasi-military agency, profession, that enforces laws. So we are enforcing laws that you are putting on the books. Now, in that, we have many law changes happening in New Jersey. First, we see the legalization of marijuana. We see changes in guidelines in use of force, motor vehicle pursuit, juvenile justice. Still learning the nuances of criminal justice reform since 2017. Our responsibility as police executives, police officers, right from chiefs down to patrol officers, we need to embrace these changes. This is 2021 policing. And the only way this works is when legislature passes laws, it is our job to embrace that, learn it, and that is what we enforce. Again, we are enforcing conduct. We are not looking at groups. We're not looking at certain organizations. We police conduct that is illegal. And again, that is embracing the laws. The Attorney General, Graywall, has given us 1 year to learn and train our officers in the new use of force guidelines and the motor vehicle pursuit guidelines. And there's debate about it. There's opinions that what's good about it, what's bad about it. That is going to be our model that we need to make work. And it's incumbent on us. We need to embrace it. We need to all understand it. And we need to give it a chance. Listen, there are parts of it I disagree with, but I'm here 28 years. And I've been a chief for 7. Even though there's parts I disagree with, we have to give it a chance. Criminal justice reform. As a chief in New Jersey, I was one of the lead people that spoke against it in the beginning because of certain crimes where people were being released right out to the street after gun crimes. There were changes made, and the whole purpose, there were 2 purposes of criminal justice reform. One, so that the criminal justice system is equal and fair. I learned that in my master's study where there was a book called The Rich Get Richer, The Poor Get Prison. And I had read that book some 5 years before criminal justice reform came into play in New Jersey in 2017. So I understand what that premise was. And the second part is to lower violent crime, put the violent criminals in jail, and those that are in for minor situations, people that are in for failing to pay fines, possession of marijuana should not be sitting in jails for 6 months waiting for court dates. So we understand that. We have to do statistical analysis. We're only a few years into this, but as much as I disagree with some, and there were some adjustments made in the beginning, I can tell you here, how violent crime is going down in Hoboken. It's gone down steadily. Violent crime has gone down in New Jersey in the last 4 years. Overall crime is up. And that's something that needs to be assessed, where burglaries are up, thefts are up, but that comes also with the economy, with unemployment, and we're dealing with that, of course, in 2020. But when you look at that, the main purpose of lowering violent crime, that seems to have the data backing it right now. So we need to continue to look at it. The last thing I want to say is let's look at this 2021 as a positive. Let's look at it as an ending of the pandemic. Let's do what we can to end this pandemic. Whether it's discussing race, religion, ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations, gender identity, and even occupations, we cannot broad brush any of those. And I say occupations because I saw what the demonizing of policing that was occurring in many areas. a lot on social media this past year, which caused a lot of stress to police officers all around the country. We need to have a mindset of equality. That's got to be the key word. It's not a political word. It's about being fair. And we need that equality coming from everyone, okay? Law enforcement officers and our residents and our elected officials. I graduated from St. Peter's Prep in 1990. I coached there for many years, and the mantra I was taught there was to be a man for others. And what I ask every single person that watches this video today, 2021, as part of people's New Year's resolutions, make a commitment to try at least once per day, do something for somebody else. All these things I discussed had a lot of negativity, had darkness. Some of these things I discussed had involved deaths. There's not too many people that can turn around and say 2020 was a beautiful year and bright year. But we need to make 2021 and the years and decades that follow better years and good years. And I think one thing I'm going to commit to, and I hope everybody can, let's try to do things for others and help all of us and help each other get out of this year. Fortunately, this year ends in a couple hours. So I wish everyone that's watching a Happy New Year. And our 150 employees of the Hoboken Police Department, I thank you for the exemplary effort that you gave this year. And it's why we're still standing going into 2021, and we're going to make it a great year. Thank you and Happy New Year.